Um, One of the things that I really find interesting about Japan in general is the amount of tradition that they still have in modern Japan and Japanese culture. You can go to Japan and you can still find apartments and houses and hotels that use tatami mats, or where you will eat and sleep on tatami mats. People still do the Hatsuhino Day and the Hatsumo Day, where they go and see the first sunrise for New Year's. And they will go and they visit temples. And they have all sorts of traditions that they still keep alive even in modern culture. And that's not something that you see in other cultures. For example, in my recent trip to Ireland, you don't really feel the same kind of tradition that they have. You know that they have a rich tradition, but they don't really keep it alive like Japan does. Their business culture is also very interesting, if not a little bit challenging. But their business culture, one example, when I was with my recruiting company, I know at least in Tokyo, they're trying to push companies to get the employees to go home earlier. So our company was trying to do that as well. We would actually cut the power, turn off the lights for our floors at 10 p.m., trying to get people to go home. There would still be some people in the dark with a flashlight on their laptops working until either the laptops died or the last train, depending on how comfortable they felt with sleeping at work. And it's very interesting, but very different. We also had the women in the workforce. We still had a lot of women leaving after they got married. So with recruiting, you usually have a large influx of younger recruits, and then they will work usually a longer career in recruiting. We had a lot of male experienced employees, but not as many female, because they would get married around 30 and then leave the workforce. And I've actually been asked, please don't leave if you get married. And it's not something that I've ever thought about, but it is still something, a part of their business culture that is very different from what I would expect here. The business culture and the differences in business culture is one of the most challenging parts though. Mainly working with a company that has both Japanese and non-Japanese staff, being able to work with both sides has been one of the most challenging parts. When I was working with the Japanese recruiting firm, I was part of a small team of non-Japanese staff, and we worked with the same clients, but not always together. I was actually part of a team of 2. They were one of the first ones to actually work with the Japanese staff and go and visit clients together to be able to build that relationship as one company where we have both Japanese and English speakers. And the way that we work with the client, the way that we follow up with the client, the way we speak with the client is a little bit different between both sides. So I really had to understand why they would do it their way and be able to work with them as one team with this one client. And it's a really big challenge that I face in my current company as well, even though we only have a small percentage of Japanese staff. Because they're in management, they're used to managing in Japan with their Japanese cultures, and then coming here and trying to work with the American staff who are halfway there to used to their mannerisms. It's a challenge. I'm not involved too much with organizations now, but I volunteered a couple of times when I was in Japan. When I was studying after graduating, I worked with a homeless shelter in Yokohama for a little bit. That was really interesting. I was the only foreigner. It was in Yokohama, so they're kind of used to seeing non-Japanese staff, but they are non-Japanese people. But they are not used to interacting with them too much. So I usually had a lot of questions, but I always stood out. No matter what I did, I always stood out. And then they would sometimes, because we had the American base there as well, they would sometimes get American food, or they would get donations from the American base every once in a while. So they get things like Pop-Tarts. And I would be so excited about seeing Pop-Tarts. And they could not understand how we would feed this sugary thing to our kids in the morning for breakfast. And it's something that I couldn't explain, but I was like, yes, I would eat this in the morning for breakfast. After that, I also did a summer camp. There's an American organization, they do summer camps in Japan. They would gather up a bunch of Americans who don't know Japanese, and they would plop them in Tokyo, and you would have a bunch of kids, anywhere from probably like 4th grade up to through high school, who have studied English but they haven't really used it. So you'd be stuck with like 10 kids, and you'd be trying to play games with them in English. You would try and get them to remember words and names to grow their vocabulary, but you'd also be teaching them things like campfire songs. Because some of the times we would actually be camping, so we'd be outside, so we'd have campfires and we'd be teaching them songs. We did American prom. We actually had a prom night to kind of show them what a prom would be. And we also did s'mores. It was all really interesting. They had no idea about, they had heard of prom, but they don't have proms normally at their high schools. And then the s'mores, that was new for them as well. But it was a lot of fun. The main things that, or the main things that have helped me get to where I am, though, would have to be both language and just cultural knowledge. One would just be a little bit of a fluency in the language has helped me tremendously, especially in recruiting, because that was something that they really needed, was to be able to have that conversation. So having a good vocabulary is helpful, but it doesn't need to be very specific. At my current company, for example, we're manufacturing, so we have a lot of words that I don't even know the English of. We've got things like burrs and mill scale and rotary grinding and carburization and all this stuff that I know in English, and I didn't need to know the Japanese either, because that would be something that you would learn on the job, and that's something that they expected as well. Some of the words may be even different if you go to a different company, and so that's another reason that they didn't really expect you to know all the specific stuff, but as long as you knew the cultural aspects and the basic conversation skills, it was enough. And then also being able to build that relationship with my colleagues as well needed really the conversation ability, as well as the cultural ability. So the being able to, when I was over there living and working there, that was really helpful to understand kind of what they grew up with, to be able to build that relationship. Both with my previous company as well as my current, one of the things that I really need to do as a bilingual is building that relationship between those who may only be monolingual, either English speaking or Japanese speaking. And so being able to help bridge them either as a translator or as a project coordinator when I'm working on the project, I also need that cultural ability to be able to understand both sides. And the last thing is just the interest in doing something other than just using the language. Mainly because 90% of what I've done is not been necessarily language oriented. It's been either recruiting or project coordinating. I did a little bit of translation, but that was about it. So it's, I have been able to experience a lot of different things, but not necessarily just by using the language just as is. It's always using the language to do something, and that's been, because I was interested in that, I've been able to experience a lot of things. But that's about it.
Thank you.